Waking up in the cozy lodge on Mount Laurenite, I eagerly embraced a day of skiing. The slopes offered a thrilling adventure, with powdery snow and stunning vistas. After a lively day on the mountain, I joined fellow skiers at the lodge cafe, sharing stories by the fireplace. Exploring the lodge's amenities revealed a spa and a charming library. The evening brought a gourmet dinner, and I ended the day stargazing on the deck. The perfect blend of adventure and relaxation made my first day on Mount Laurenite unforgettable. As night fell on the lodge, an eerie symphony of crashing trees and inhuman screeches filled the air. The lodge's deck offered a haunting view of the turmoil in the forest, with unsettling sounds emanating from a nearly 7-foot cliff face. Inside, guests exchanged uneasy glances, seeking refuge in the lodge's warmth. The staff reassured us, attributing the unsettling noises to natural forces. Despite the mysterious backdrop, the lodge maintained its comfortable ambience. As I settled into my room, the unsettling sounds persisted, creating a restless atmosphere. The night at the lodge unfolded as a surreal blend of awe and unease, leaving unanswered questions lingering in the mountain air. In the dim moonlight on the lodge's deck, the unsettling symphony of sounds reached a chilling climax, intrigued by the mysterious commotion, a cacophony peering into the night. Suddenly, a grotesque creature emerged from the shadows, its form illuminated in the moon's eerie glow. The creature stood tall, its silhouette a nightmarish amalgamation of sinew, limbs, and gnarled features. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity, capturing the darkness within its twisted form. Jagged spines adorned its back, casting ominous shadows as it moved. The creature noticed me on the balcony, its screech intensifying, sending shivers down my spine. The sound was a blend of anguish and malevolence, echoing through the mountainous terrain. The creature's movements were unsettlingly agile, each step accompanied by a disturbing contortion of its twisted anatomy. Its skin, if one could call it that, appeared mottled and scarred, revealing a history of unknown horrors. The creature's elongated limbs terminated in claws that seemed capable of tearing through anything in its path. The air was thick with an acrid scent as the creature approached, revealing its predatory intent. Frozen in terror, I watched as the creature locked eyes with me, its gaze penetrating the veil between reality and nightmare. The balcony became a stage for a macabre dance, the creature's screeches and my pounding heart forming an eerie duet. As the night unfolded, the lodge's once comforting ambience transformed into an unsettling refuge. The creature's presence lingered in the shadows, leaving an indelible mark on the night at Mount Laurenite's lodge. The symphony of the mountain had taken a dark turn, and the creature's haunting visage remained etched in my memory. The grotesque creature, its form twisted and nightmarish, abruptly broke into a demonic sprint towards me on the balcony. Its movements were a blur as it closed the distance with terrifying speed. Panic surged through me as the creature, fueled by an unknown malevolence, slammed its full weight into the cabin door, shaking the structure with each furious impact. The door strained under the relentless assault, groaning as if resisting the intrusion of forces beyond comprehension. Fear clenched my chest as I braced against the balcony railing, the creature's screeches now replaced by the thunderous crashes against the door. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the cacophony ceased, a haunting silence enveloping the lodge, leaving only the echoing resonance of the creature's last impact against the door. Uncertainty hung in the air as I continually surveyed the surroundings. Just as a false sense of relief settled in, a chilling tapping commenced. It was rhythmic and deliberate, echoing from every window of the lodge. The creature, it seemed, had shifted its focus to finding another entry point. The taps were like morbid percussion, creating a suspenseful symphony of dread. Each tap felt like a sinister whisper, the creature methodically exploring every inch of the lodge in its pursuit. Shadows danced across the windows as it sought a vulnerability to exploit. The once welcoming lodge now felt like a fortress under siege, its very foundations tested by an otherworldly force. The tapping crescendoed into a nerve-wracking rhythm, intensifying the suspense. I stood paralyzed, caught in the heart of the pounding climax of the surreal encounter. The night at Mount Laurenite Lodge had evolved into a harrowing struggle, with the creature's relentless pursuit echoing in the haunting symphony of the mountain's mysteries. As the creature relentlessly battered against the cabin door, a haunting familiarity swept over me, transporting my thoughts to a chilling incident from my past. Years ago, I had been caught in a fierce current while swimming too close to a dam. The force was relentless, pulling me under with an unforgiving grip. In those harrowing moments, I felt the icy embrace of imminent doom, the realization sinking in that there was nothing I could do but wait for the inevitable. Miraculously, I had managed to break free, just before the current dragged me into the dam's abyss. The brush with my impending morality left an indelible mark, a visceral understanding of the helplessness that arises when confronted by forces beyond control. It was a moment when the fight-or-flight response faltered, and the stark reality of one's vulnerability took center stage. Now, on the lodge's balcony, as the grotesque creature relentlessly tried to find a way in with brute force, that same sense of impending doom resurfaced. The cabin, my supposed refuge, felt like a sinking vessel in a stormy sea, each impact of the creature's assault echoing the relentless pull of that dam's current. Helplessly gripping the balcony rail, the feeling of impending doom intensified. The creature's unrelenting determination mirrored the inexorable force of that damn current. Fight or flight, both were futile, and the cold grip of vulnerability settled in, much like that moment when I was caught in the merciless current. As the creature abruptly fell silent, the lodge became a crucible of anticipation. The tapping on the windows, reminiscent of that fateful current's pull, evoked a chilling déjà vu. In those suspenseful seconds, I stood paralyzed, entwined with the echoes of past helplessness, bracing for the unknown as the creature sought entry. The night at Mount Laurenite Lodge had become a surreal tapestry where past and present converged in a symphony of vulnerability and dread. A split-second decision made me jump from the balcony as I bolted for my skis. The creature realized what I had done and screeched after me. As I descended the mountain, the enraged creature pursued me with relentless fury. Its mutated form oozed grotesque tendrils, and its elongated limbs resembled twisted vines. The once molten eyes now glowed with a sickly radiance, casting a hunting glow across the night. Navigating the treacherous trails and hurtling over snow-covered crevices, the creature closed in with ghastly speed. Each step it took left a trail of mutated, ooze-like substance in the snow, painting a nightmarish picture of its relentless pursuit. Realizing the imminent danger, I accelerated towards the cliff's edge. The creature's screeches intensified, echoing through the mountainous landscape as it closed the gap. Just as its razor-sharp claws slashed at my calf, I slammed my ski poles into the ground with a desperate force. The abrupt stop sent me hurtling forward, my legs dangling over the edge. The creature, unable to halt its momentum, barreled off the cliff with a gut-wrenching screech. Time seemed to slow as the night air filled with the grotesque symphony of the creature's demise. The fall was a descent into a nightmarish finality. The creature, impaled on a shard of rock at the cliff's base, writhed in agony. Its tendrils flailed wildly, leaving a gruesome trail of mutated substance in the snow. The screeches, now distorted and gurgling, filled the air until the mountain fell silent once more. As I caught my breath, the eerie glow from the creature's eyes dimmed, and the mountain embraced a tranquil stillness. A gory tableau at the cliff's base stood as a testament to the night's surreal horror. The once vibrant trail and snow-covered crevice bore witness to the harrowing chase, concluding in the chilling silence that followed the creature's final, gory descent into oblivion. Limping back to the lodge, my adrenaline-fueled escape left me in desperate need of medical attention. The once cozy refuge had transformed into a scene of chaos, marked by the aftermath of the creature's rampage. Lodge staff, shaken and bewildered, rushed to assist me, offering the care I desperately needed. As dawn painted the horizon with hues of orange and pink, a surreal turn of events unfolded. Armored vehicles rolled up to the lodge, each marked with the insignia of a black hawk clutching a globe. Men in tactical gear disembarked, a formidable presence against the serene mountain backdrop. The air buzzed with an air of secrecy as they approached, their movements precise and purposeful. They presented a non-disclosure agreement, demanding my signature in exchange for their intervention and aid. The document bore the acronym CSO and showcased a logo depicting a black hawk gripping the earth in its talons. The clandestine nature of the encounter unfolded as I signed the NDA, sealing my silence against the night's bizarre events. The men, presumably from the covert organization represented on the paper, efficiently coordinated with lodge staff. They examined the aftermath, collecting samples and analyzing the mutated residue left by the creature. Their movements spoke of a well-practiced routine, as if such incidents were not as uncommon as one might believe. As the sun emerged, the armored vehicles departed as swiftly as they had arrived, leaving the lodge in an eerie calm. The mountain, now bathed in the warm glow of morning, seemed to conceal the secrets of the night before. The events of that harrowing night remained a closely guarded secret, locked behind the signed NDAs and the enigmatic logo of the CSO. The lodge, once a sanctuary, now bore witness to the convergence of natural mystery and clandestine operations taken out by an organization that navigates the thin line between reality and the supernatural. The drive down the mountain was a journey through the aftermath of a surreal night. The peacefulness of the wilderness road provided a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded only hours earlier. The first light of dawn painted the snow-covered landscape in a soft glow, casting an ethereal aura over the mountain. However, as the roads neared the cliff base, where the creature met its grisly demise, a profound unease settled in. The armored vehicles had left no trace. but the spot where the creature had landed was frozen in time. The mutated residue, a grotesque testament to the creature's violent end, marred the pristine snow. Its visage and the ooze had left an indelible mark, a chilling reminder of the unearthly encounter. A shiver ran down my spine as the road offered a close-up view of the remnants. The creature, once a nightmarish force, was no longer present, yet its essence lingered in the eerie silence. The frozen imprints and shadows in the snow hinted at a grotesque finality that had transpired just hours earlier. Caught in the grip of an uncanny chill, I noticed the creature's shadow seemingly slinking into the woods of Mount Lauronite. Dismissing it as a trick of the mind, I continued the descent, my gaze fixed on the road ahead. The rational part of my mind attributed the fleeting image to fatigue and the lingering effects of a night filled with horror and creatures of myth. As I drove away from the mountain's embrace, the rising sun painted the sky in hues of orange and gold. The tranquility of the morning seemed to wash away the night's ordeal. The creature, the CSO, the enigmatic events of Mount Lauronite faded into the rearview mirror, leaving behind a lingering sense of mystery and the profound realization that some secrets are best left undisturbed in the shadows of the unknown. Everyone knows that dreams are strange, but people often say they have deeper meanings. The details of your dreams vanish in an instant, leaving only faint impressions behind. I have to admit, I've tried to remember my dreams, especially back when I was in therapy after a bad car accident. My therapist suggested I log the details of my dreams to help with the healing process. I'm doing well now, but I remember searching online for websites that could help me remember my dreams more clearly. Like those who seek to experience lucid dreaming. That's when I came across a website I often visited called Dreamstorm.com. It started when a friend messaged me asking how I was doing. I replied and asked if he knew of any websites that could help me with dream recall. About 12 minutes later, just as I was heading to the fridge for a snack, he finally responded. Dreamstorm.com, he wrote, mentioning he'd seen it discussed on a subreddit. He said it was weird, but might be useful for my problem. I clicked on the link he sent, and it opened a forum website. The site featured several videos linked to YouTube, mostly about healthy sleep habits. The design was reminiscent of Reddit or 4chan, yet it felt oddly comforting. The background was gray, and the website's logo was a brain with a pentacle in the center. The symbol surprised me. I thought my friend might have sent me to some weird occult site, but I decided to check it out. Each thread had a different topic related to dreams, but some were a bit off. The first thread I clicked on was about illustrations people had made based on what they vaguely remembered from their dreams. As I scrolled through, I saw a series of drawings that made me feel increasingly uncomfortable. I'll try to describe the illustrations as best I can. Blind Pig Jim. The illustration was drawn in a sketchbook. It depicted a tall, lanky, shirtless old man wearing a mask that resembled a pig's face. The background featured a series of houses in a surreal landscape, with the sun displaying a disturbingly realistic face. The artist commented, "I had a dream where I was being watched by this guy in a pig mask. The sun was always singing a strange song about flowers. Every time I walked into a house, it was empty, except for a jar of human eyeballs in the center." Window watchers. This artwork was unsettling, to say the least. It showed a small sketch of a bedroom from the perspective of somebody sitting on a bed. The room contained various objects: a dresser with knobs replaced by staring eyes, a tall lamp in the corner. At first, nothing seemed unusual until I noticed, thanks to the comments, a man standing behind the window, staring with huge dilated eyes and a sick, perverted smile. The artist didn't provide a proper comment, just a poem. Window watcher, passing through, watching you sleep is all he do. He picks a friend, I wonder who. Close your blinds, shame on you. You're gonna make him feel so blue. Oh, so sad, boo-hoo-hoo. God is here. This was more of a doodle. It depicted a man standing in front of 3 obelisks that seemed to stare at him. Above them was a singular being, distorted by scribbles, with clouds of smoke presented similarly about him. There was no comment, and I assume the title served as the description. A lot of these illustrations were disturbing, but those 3 stuck with me the most. As I scrolled through the threads, I noticed several people describing similar dreams, which only added to my discomfort. Feeling unsettled, I closed the website and shut down my computer. It was already around 2 or 3 a.m., and I realized I'd been exploring the site for quite some time. I climbed into bed, hoping for some rest, but as soon as I drifted off, I found myself back in my chair. I walked towards my bedroom door, but when I opened it, my house had transformed into a cold concrete staircase. I ascended the steps, feeling a growing sense of dread, until I reached a red metal door. I grasped the handle and tried to open it. Then suddenly, I woke up. I couldn't move for a while after waking up, struggling to process what might have been behind that door in my dream. Eventually, I got out of bed, turned on my computer, and went back to the website. As soon as it loaded, I found one of the threads and posted about my dream. After a few minutes, somebody replied, saying they had experienced something similar. However, instead of the red metal door being at the top of a staircase, it was in their house. Several more people began commenting on my post, sharing their own stories about the red metal door. I kept scrolling through the forums, delving deeper and deeper into every thread, trying to understand what my dreams could mean. It wasn't just about other dreams. What did mine say about me? I continued until I encountered a thread titled Sigmund AVI. I clicked on it and saw that most of the posts were about nightmares, many with accompanying videos. There were too many to describe in full, but here are the ones that stood out. Melody AVI. The video was set at night in a playground. A faint, melancholy groaning could be heard, as if someone or something was singing in pain. The camera panned across the playground, then focused on a colorful structure. There, a creature with a mutilated face stared directly at the camera. It looked like a man, whose neck had been twisted and mangled, with no eyelids. The video ended abruptly, with the creature's face filling the screen, sending chills down my spine as I stared at it. Wish Watch, MP4. The video began with static, then cut to a clip of a person sleeping in bed. The cameraman silently watched the person for about 12 minutes. As the person began to stir and wake up, the cameraman suddenly fled and the video cut off. The comment section was flooded with links to the window watcher drawing, repeating over and over. Some commenters dismissed the video as a reenactment of the artwork, but something about it felt disturbingly real to me. Sadwalker AVI. The video wouldn't play. I tried multiple times, but it remained stuck on the first frame. A disfigured man in a trench coat and a fedora, standing on a dark street. The comments explained that the video was broken, likely taken down by the original poster, but the corrupted file somehow remained online. One commenter who had seen the video before it was removed described it as showing the disfigured man walking down the street and eventually killing a dog in a blind fit of rage. I was relieved I didn't have to see the gore described by that commenter. I wouldn't want to witness such a thing. Several of these videos were somewhat related to dreams, but most were simply disturbing. I continued exploring the threads of the forum, skipping the videos and reading several posts about dreams, some more unsettling than others. Eventually, I decided to leave the forum and return to the softer, more popular section of the websites that weren't as horrifying as Sigmund AVI. I was about to go back to the illustration thread when I noticed something off about the website's logo. It usually featured a pentacle inside of a brain, but now it displayed a Greek letter instead. I clicked on it, and a black background appeared on my screen, with the same red metal door from my dream. I moved my mouse towards it and clicked it. The page took me back to the website, but now it's different. The forums were all gone, replaced by a single message, undergoing repairs. I decided to close the window and turn off my computer. It was about 5 p.m. I went about my day, but a few hours later, I returned to my computer and found that the website was gone. Everything had been deleted, and I searched for any information about what had happened to Dreamstorm.com. I checked other websites, trying to find anything about it, but several people commented that it had never existed. I even asked my friend about it, but he claimed not to know what I was talking about. I showed him our message as proof that he had sent me the website, but he just gave me a confused look. The link he had sent wasn't to Dreamstorm.com, but to a Wikipedia article about dreams. If anyone has any information about Dreamstorm.com, please let me know as soon as possible. Miss Fiora, can you please come to school as soon as possible? Miss Morgan, the school guidance counselor, asked. Julian isn't hurt, but he's in a very serious situation. When I asked what happened, Miss Morgan said it was better to explain when I arrived. Bewildered and unnerved, I feared the worst when speculating what my 8-year-old might have done. Julian could sometimes be a bit unruly at home, but never once got into any trouble at school. Julian's teachers loved him, and he appeared to get along with all of his classmates, which made this so unusual. Despite pondering every conceivable scenario during the drive, I never would have guessed what my son had ultimately done in a million years. My stomach sank when I saw an ambulance and a trio of police cruisers in front of the school. After parking in the visitors' parking lot, I was greeted by Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Quatero, Julian's teacher, Mrs. Jones, the principal, and 2 police officers, one of whom happened to be my cousin, Brady. I noticed none of them looked angry. They all had the same disturbed looks of horror and disbelief across their face. "Miss Fiora, thank you for coming so quickly," Miss Jones said. "Where's my son?" I asked anxiously. "What did he do?" "He's with Miss Isbister right now, the school psychologist," Miss Jones quickly replied. Before I could ask any questions, Brady stepped forward and took me aside. "Look, they figured it'd be best if I tell you what's going on, so brace yourself," Brady said softly, taking a breath before continuing. "Julian brought a head to school. An actual human head." "What?" was all I could gasp out, after not saying anything for a few seconds, unsure if I'd heard Brady correctly. "He had it in his backpack. Did you see him leave the house today?" "I waited with him for the bus like I always do every morning." I was unsure if there was a hint of suspicion in Brady's voice. I had no reason to think anything out of the ordinary was going on. When I asked Brady what exactly happened, he motioned for Mr. Quatero, who slowly walked over to where I stood. Mr. Quatero was visibly distraught over the incident, as indicated by his trembling hand, ironically only having 4 fingers, when we briefly exchanged a shake. When Brady asked him to recount the happenings, Mr. Quatero swallowed nervously before beginning. "The kids were supposed to have show and tell yesterday, but we just couldn't get to it in time, so I had them do it today before lunch," Mr. Quatero said, his face contorting with disgust while giving the account. "When it was Julian's turn, he said he brought in a special friend. He just pulled it out of his pack like it was nothing in front of the whole class. Julian said the head was his Uncle Milty," Brady added. He doesn't have an Uncle Milty," I said, staring mystified at my cousin. "Did he say where he found it?" "He said the head was growing from the ground in the woods behind your house." My blood ran cold and my mind started racing. I wasn't sure what rattled me more, Julian seeing and physically handling a human head, or the grim prospect that someone's remains were discarded a stone's throw away from where my family slept. Julian wasn't allowed in the woods bordering the backyard unsupervised, and even when permitted, knew he had to stay within view. When could he have made such a gruesome discovery without us knowing? "Take me to my son." Julian was playing with Legos in Miss Isbister's office when I entered, seemingly unaware of the situation's severity. Miss Isbister said Julian was immediately brought here, while he and Mr. Quatero tried getting his class under control. When I asked if Julian explained why he did this, Mr. Isbister's answer sent a sharp chill down my spine. He said Uncle Milty told him to. Mr. Isbister let Brady and I speak with Julian alone in his office. My son was elated to see me, and seemed under the impression that this was some kind of special occasion. The innocent, unsuspecting look on his young face showed Julian appeared unaware that he'd done anything wrong, which for me made this ordeal extra difficult. "Julian, do you know what's going on?" I asked while sitting with him on the couch. "Do you know why we're here right now?" Julian's smile faded when he saw how concerned Brady and I looked. "Julian, who's Uncle Milty?" I asked, when my son's eyes started to wander around the office. "You don't have an uncle with that name." "He lived in a hole behind our house," Julian said nonchalantly, appearing more interested in getting back to playing with the Legos. "I'm helping him find a new home." Brady and I looked at each other, both of us visibly perturbed by Julian's answer. "What do you mean, cuz?" Brady said quickly, seeing that I was at a loss for words. "Can you tell me exactly where you found the head? Uncle Milty?" Julian's smile returned. "I was trying to find a ball I hit really hard into the woods, and I found him sticking out of the ground." I knew the exact day Julian was referring to. This past Saturday afternoon. Julian and my husband had been playing baseball when he hit an absolute howitzer that sailed into the tree line. Although they spread out to find the ball, my husband said Julian was always within view. It took over half an hour for them to find it, and I do remember losing sight of them quite a few times while they searched. Julian must have found it then, I thought, becoming deeply unsettled when I imagined the naive look on his face when he made such a grisly discovery. "Would you be able to show us where you found him?" Brady asked. "And did you take Uncle Milty with you the day you found him?" Julian shook his head. "I visited him again before he told me to take him. He lived where the woodpile used to be." Julian was talking about a large mound of firewood in our backyard. It took a few days, but my husband and I had relocated all the wood to another part of the yard. Its original location was a few yards into the tree line. We wanted to build a shed there, but wound up finding a better spot, despite clearing the area. I nodded at Brady, indicating I knew the exact spot Julian was describing. Julian, what do you mean when you said he told you to take him? Who are you talking to? Julian looked at Brady perplexed. Uncle Milty. He told me that I could take him with me. So you've been talking to this Uncle Milty head, like how the three of us are talking right now? I asked, tightly pursing my lips when Julian nodded his affirmation. I don't know what I'd have said if someone told me earlier today my son would bring a human head into school that was also his imaginary friend. Mr. Isbister said Julian may have been severely traumatized by what he found, and imagined that the interactive qualities were a way of coping. When Julian was getting looked at by the school nurse, Brady took me to see if I recognized the head's face. The severed head was kept in an ice-filled cooler out in the ambulance. It was in a large, clear evidence bag, and looked to have only died fairly recently. I didn't recognize the man, who appeared to be in his 30s and had a bloated face with narrow cheeks, large black eyes, a Roman nose, thick pink lips, and short blonde hair. His eyes were still open, looking in different directions, and the mouth hung agape, its tongue partially protruding from between its teeth. The head's whitish-beige skin had patches of mottling, darkened veins, proverbial deathly gray tints synonymous with corpses. I only looked long enough to verify I didn't recognize the man's face, before having to suppress an upcoming urge to vomit. Julian was medically and physically evaluated before we were both interviewed by detectives at the police station. We didn't get home until later that night, and by then, a forensics team had already set up shop on my property. Brady kept me informed, and was at my house monitoring the situation. The whole area in front of my home was quarantined off by yellow police tape, and jam-packed with a sundry of police vehicles. Brady and one of the detectives met me at the perimeter. I kept Julian near me while walking up to Brady and the other detective, who had me bring my son inside when we spoke. Our cadaver dogs instantly picked up a scent and brought us right to the spot your son mentioned. The detective, whose last name was Vendetto, began. We unearthed a shallow grave containing the remains of a body. A headless body. Despite largely expecting this, hearing someone confirm that it was actually real made it no easier to accept. There was a corpse buried on my property that nobody probably would have found if we hadn't moved a heaping woodpile. A decomposing body my son had the misfortune of discovering. No child is ever meant to experience those kinds of realities life offers at such a delicate age. Although Julian maintained a reserved exterior thus far, I shuddered to think what actual thoughts and impacts this experience might have on my son. If it really was where the old woodpile used to be, which was there before I ever bought the house, it had to have been there for a long time, right? I inquired, particularly emphasizing how the woodpile predated when my family lived at the house. Well, that's the thing, Brady replied, getting an approving nod from Detective Vendetto. Whoever's head Julian found has probably only been dead for 7 or 8 days tops. The other remains were buried there for a while, years probably. I squinted in confusion at Brady and the detective. So, they're looking for a body right now. There's 2 out there. Maybe not here, Detective Vendetto said. We haven't found any more remains yet, but we think someone might have dismembered and dispersed another body, whose head your son found. It didn't make any sense. There was no way the head Julian found and decapitated remains they discovered were the same person, but I couldn't chalk up Julian finding the head where a set of other remains lay as a coincidence. Without any substantial proof, however, we were only left to speculate. Despite a thorough search of the woods behind my house and surrounding area, no additional human remains were ever found. Since the body was on our property, we had to be formally cleared of any wrongdoing. While undergoing that process, more peculiar happenings occurred. 2 days after the incident, Brady told me that the head Julian found went missing at the police station, seemingly disappeared overnight without a trace. 1 week later, Julian's teacher, Mr. Quattro, was killed. Only his severed head was discovered. The man's body was never found. My husband and I kept Julian out of school since that day, and were considering transferring him so he could have a fresh start. Hearing news of his teacher's demise, which I kept away from him, prompted us to go through with the move. Even before eventually selling the house, we packed up and relocated to a new town, Julian adjusting well, despite still receiving therapy to help him manage his understanding of what had happened, always speaking of Uncle Milty in high regard if he ever came up in the conversation. Our new home was closer to my job, and Julian made friends quickly at his new school. About 3 months passed since his show-and-tell incident. It was Julian's birthday, who I hadn't gotten a chance to call since my morning and early afternoon had been filled with back-to-back meetings and calls and appointments. I was already behind schedule and putting the final touches on a report that was 15 minutes past due. I heard my office door open, which I knew was my final appointment before lunch. Keeping my eyes glued to the computer screen, I told my client to sit tight for 5 minutes, determined to have this write-up finished and sent before shifting gears. I heard him mutter something under his breath in a disgruntled tone before walking up to one of the chairs in front of my desk. While finishing the report, I pulled up my calendar to view my meeting details, since my assistant made some last-minute changes to the morning schedule and failed to specify what they were before going to lunch. Soon as the appointment opened on my screen, however, I heard the abrupt footsteps of the client walking towards the door. "I'm so sorry about that. I didn't mean to be rude, but..." I was worried my inattentiveness may have rubbed him the wrong way, but I quickly pulled my eyes from the computer just as he was about to leave the office. I caught a long enough glimpse to remember his face, long and narrow with beady, sly-looking black eyes, reddish-pink lips that formed a half-smirk, a balding forehead, and short, dark hair. Adjusting his fleeced, tall neck collar, he looked at me with disgust and disappointment before closing the door behind him with his hand. I quickly stood up and tried to gesture for the man to stay, kicking myself for being so inconsiderate and dreading the possible ramifications of this misstep. He looked oddly familiar, I thought while hurrying across my office. Hoping to catch him, I swung the door open, but he was already gone, stomping away in frustration. I slowly shut the door, thankful my assistant didn't witness my spectacle. Turning back to face my office, I froze after noticing a package on one of the chairs. It was a square box about 14 by 14 and gift-wrapped in plaid red and green paper. There was a card taped to the top of the package, addressed to my son. Upon reading it, I was hit with a spinning lightheadedness when I remembered where I had previously seen that man's face. "Dear Julian, wishing you a happy birthday, as promised. Thank you again for helping me to get a new look. We'll talk soon. Uncle Milty." I stood there, holding the card in my shaky hands, constantly rereading the handwritten note inside of it, while trying to comprehend who was just in my office. However, it wasn't his face being that of a severed head Julian had found, which had filled me with paralyzing terror. The man's hands he'd used to shut the office door behind him with only had 4 fingers. I grew up in southern Appalachia, in western North Carolina, 30 minutes outside the town of Asheville. The hills and hollers of the Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains in the world, with some of the rock formations dating back over 1 billion years. That quite literally means they were here before there were terrestrial animals. As with most things that have been on Earth for a long time, there are inexplicable anomalies, both benevolent and malevolent. For example, the Brown Mountain Lights. Never in my life have I felt threatened or uneasy when witnessing them from Wiseman's view. They're neither good nor evil, they just are. On the benevolent side, sometimes you can walk through an abandoned old church up near my mom and dad's property, and you can feel a good, warm, happy energy. It's like that first warm day of summer when the sunshine is not too hot, but not too cold either. Well, this story is not about one such anomaly. It's about something that's definitely malevolent. About a decade ago, I was in night school at the AB Tech, going to school for automotive mechanics. I would go into class about 2 p.m. after I got off my part-time job, and I would end up getting home about 10:30, depending on the traffic, that is. Every night I drove the same road in my old 1973 W200 Dodge pickup. Some nights it would get rather boring, and I would take a different route, jump off of I-40 and drive the back roads. On this particular evening, I had decided to just stay on the I-40 because I just wanted to get home and go to bed. It was Thursday, and there was no class on Friday. I wanted to get in bed early so I could go up in the woods and go hiking early tomorrow morning and watch the sun come up. As I jumped off the I-40 onto the exit where my parents lived, the night seemed to get darker, and none of the animals that I could hear through my rolled-down windows made any more noise. The cab of my truck became smaller and smaller, and my breath quickened. I've never faced any kind of anxiety in my life, but at that moment, something felt off, and there was no way I could put my finger on what it was. I came to a stop on the exit ramp, turned to go down the road, and happened to notice that the gas station off the exit where Mom and Dad lived had no lights on. They were a 24-hour truck stop and always had lights on, but I didn't think about it again after noticing. I just chalked it up to a power outage, but I could not shake the feeling that something was definitely askew. I slowly shifted through all the old truck gears, not wanting to make any more noise than an old pickup truck already did. I leaned over my steering wheel to look up at the moon through the windshield, and there was barely any stars visible, which was way out of the ordinary. If you've ever been to Appalachia, primarily the sparsely populated areas where I'm from, you can see the Milky Way on a clear night. An absence of stars back home is only due to cloud cover, or whatever in the hell went on this particular night. As I rounded a particularly sharp left-hand curve and chugged through a straight stretch before the next right-hander, I looked at the ancient, decaying barn I always gazed at when riding that stretch of road, and thought about how long that thing had been here, and how many advancements and civilizations it had seen. For the split second that my gaze wandered, a very large, sickly-looking dog ran out in front of my truck, no more than 10 feet in front of me. Old Betsy was a good truck, but she didn't stop well. Thump, thump! I heard the fence post I had left in my truck bounce up in the bed, and then back into it as I slid to a stop. My first thought was, oh God, now I have to go tell these neighbors that I ran over their dog. That shit doesn't go real far with people around here. It can really kinda set them off, depending on the dog and the person. As I sat there breathing in the smell of burning rubber, something else found its way into my nose. The stench of rotting flesh. It's not a smell you ever forget once you smell it one time. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. I just chalked it up to some rotting roadkill nearby. Finally, I thought to myself, let me check and see who this dog belongs to. I pushed my clutch in, shifted to reverse, and as I looked in my rearview mirror, illuminated by the haunting glow of my reverse lamps, was the same dog, only it wasn't on 4 legs anymore. It stood up, like a man over 10 feet tall. Only then did it dawn on me that the front of my truck was every bit of 5 feet tall, and this dog was every bit of 5 feet tall at the shoulders on all 4s. As it turned its head to look in the direction of my truck, I caught only a glimpse of this creature. It was not a dog. It certainly was not a man. It was somewhere in between, and at the same time, entirely separate altogether. Its skin hung loose off its emaciated frame, like a raccoon. Bits of matted fur and dirt and mud clung to its legs like a disease. The right arm seemed a little bit longer than the left, and they both hung abnormally low in relation to either animal this creature seemed to be. As it regained its senses, it turned and looked into the mirror like it knew exactly where I was sitting. The face was that of a man, but the very edges of its face seemed not to be totally defined. They seemed to move and change, like something you could see at a cellular level in a scientific documentary. There were no eyes, but only sockets where eyes should be. No hair either, and the skin that was dripping off its face was a cold, lifeless gray color. The nose was short and shoved into its face like a bulldog, but the teeth still haunt me. It was definitely carnivorous, and true to form, the rest of its unnatural look, many of its teeth didn't seem to be arranged in a natural way in its mouth. They seemed to fill and spill forth from the undefinable face, almost like they knew the horror they occupied and they were searching for a way out. It stared through my life into my eyes and past my soul. It seemed like an eternity, but it could not have been more than 5 seconds that I sat there paralyzed. A light came on at the house next to the road, causing the creature to snap its gaze in that direction, tear off into the woods on its back 2 legs. I jammed my old truck into first gear and roasted tires all the way through first, snatched second, and drove as fast as I could home. When I got to the house, both my parents were asleep. I went downstairs into my bedroom and loaded every firearm I possessed and locked all the doors. I couldn't wake them up. Who would believe that? And at 10:30 on a Thursday night? The basement was eerily quiet that night. Even their dog that got up to raise hell outside if any animal came close was dead silent. The old post and beam house didn't even creak or pop that night, as was usual. At about 3 a.m., I finally started to get drowsy, and as I went to lay my head down and get some sleep so I could still attempt to go hiking the next morning, I smelled the stench of death again. It was faint at first, but it was definitely there. I thought to myself, you're just going crazy. None of that was real. But as I dwelt on it, it became more and more noticeable until it filled the entire basement. My dad has a home office in the basement with 2 large glass doors that face the Pisgah National Forest, an impenetrable 500,000-acre wood. I finally worked up the courage to walk out of my bedroom and into the basement's living area, with my little tactical 12-gauge loaded, tack light on. I covered the flashlight with my hand so as not to make my presence known until it needed to be, and as I turned right out of the living room into my dad's office, I shined the light through the glass doors, and at the edge of the woods, there stood the creature. It was motionless. It stared right into the light, unafraid, with those soulless sockets devoid of eyes. I quickly covered my tack light, ran into the living room, and flipped on the outside floodlights in my surprise. But it was no longer standing at the edge of the woods, but between the house and the edge of the woods, still motionless. I swung the door open and fired every round I had in its direction. I must have scored a couple of hits because it screeched an unearthly scream, like that of a woman being slaughtered as it took to the woods. The dog went crazy. Mom and Dad woke up asking what the hell I was doing. I told them that a bear had gotten into the trash and I was scaring it away. They didn't believe me, but I know they wouldn't believe the truth either. I didn't sleep that night, or any time until the following Sunday. Everything seemed to return to normal, and I didn't think about the creature again until I met my wife about 6 years ago. Her mother's house sits at the mouth of the holler, no more than 4 or 5 miles up the road from my mother and father's house. Up on the side of the holler, there's a kennel for her brother's hunting dogs. No longer in use, and hasn't been for years, but the fence is still there, and the concrete pads are still there. It's a thing of great use when you need to quarantine an animal. Her Great Pyrenees had gotten into a tussle with a raccoon, which of course he destroyed, but his rabies vaccine had lapsed, so we had to keep him quarantined for a time. It didn't bother him. He kinda liked solitude. This particular night, we were coming home from a movie date in the neighboring town. Was the last night of quarantine for him. So we walked up the trail, using our phone flashlights to get to the kennel, and there he sat, patiently waiting, tail wagging, happy to see us. We put him on a leash and started walking him back towards the house with us. As we were walking back through the darkness, I started to feel that same feeling I'd felt the night I hit the creature in my truck. I didn't say anything so as not to alarm my wife, but when the smell came wafting in on the breeze, she jokingly asked me, "My God, what did you eat? You stink." I half laughed, not being able to fully appreciate the joke for the horror that raged in my mind. She immediately caught on and asked what was wrong, to which I could only reply, "I'll tell you later." She grew up in the woods and around hunting and things of that nature her whole life, so she knew what I meant. She knew we were being watched by something. When we could see the lights of the house from the trail to the kennel, we heard it. There came barking from the kennel that sound just like the Great Pyrenees we had on a leash next to us. It was a perfect imitation. The Pyrenees, being a guardian dog, immediately sensed that something was wrong, and so he turned to face the danger, belting out a deep bark and growl in that direction. I don't know if you've ever had to drag a 150-pound dog, but it sucks, and it's no easy task. I'm 6 feet, 240 pounds, and it was all I could do to get him back in the house. The barking never ceased the entire time we were running for the house. In fact, it seemed to grow closer and closer, till it seemed it was coming from inside my own head. Her mother heard the commotion and flipped the floodlights on, and we made it to the fence of the yard as I caught a glimpse of something coming to a dead stop at the end where the lights reached, wheeling around and tearing off into the darkness. My wife looked at me and said, "You want to tell me what the hell that was?" To which I replied, "Yes, let's go inside." I told her the story, and she listened intently, hanging on to every word. Her family came from a long line of granny witches and other supernatural healers from Appalachia, so her older sister came over the next morning with some herbs and chants to bless the property and to ward off evil. I suggested we go up to the dog kennels and do them as well. When we got to the kennels, they were completely destroyed. The very concrete foundation was cracked, and the chain-link fence was torn off its post. The dog houses were destroyed, and the place reeked of the stench that followed that creature. My wife's older sister just went about her business like normal, blessed the place, burnt some herbs, and led us back to the property. When we got into the house, she wheeled about on us suddenly and instructed us very firmly to never go into the woods after dark, not until this thing left me alone. To make a long story short, my wife joined the military, and she ended up getting stationed in Delaware. Well, as someone who lived around fairly large mountains and endless wilderness their entire life, Delaware is pretty terrible. At least, that was my thought when we first moved into the middle of a 50,000 plus population city. Fortunately, though, it didn't take long to find a house in a sleepy little community further south. We purchased the house and moved in with haste. We were both very grateful and glad to be out of the city and into a rural setting again. The land in Delaware seems lifeless in comparison to Appalachia. The sparsely populated woods don't possess any energy that goes one way or t'other. The ground doesn't seem to be alive like it is in Appalachia. Having had no thoughts about the creature in a long time, I resumed my staying outside after dark and playing with our dogs in a rather large yard that bordered on a small patch of woods. Well, last night I went outside to play with the dogs, and as dark set in, I built a decent-sized fire in my fire pit and consumed some good old-fashioned Appalachian Mountain cough syrup from a mason jar. And just as the fire was dying down, my American bulldog tore off towards the woods. He has a habit of running off to go on adventures, so my immediate instinct was to chase him down in the yard and tackle him so he couldn't get away. As I tackled his 110-pound ass to the ground and threw him in a fireman's carry over my shoulder, I heard him begin to bark, only the bark wasn't coming from him. The only sound coming from him was a deep, rumbling growl, a noise I've never heard him make before. It was a threatening noise. Something was definitely wrong, and as I ran with him on my shoulder back to the house, the stench of death again began to fill the air. The other two dogs must have caught the wind and what was happening, and met me at the back door, which I threw open, slammed shut, and locked as I again began to load firearms. How the hell could this thing have followed us 650 miles up here? As I flipped the floodlights on at the back side of the house, several of the bushes and small trees at the forest's edge were still shaking like something had just run through them. My dogs went crazy all night, barking and howling and attempting to get out of the windows. I didn't sleep a bit, and I don't think I will for a while. I know for sure I won't be in the woods after dark again. Not in life. Not until this thing is gone. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. No, don't worry. This isn't another Appalachian Grandpa story. This is from a user Subaruglian on Reddit, who also seems to have a love for Appalachia, just like yours truly. If you've been with the channel long, you know that I love the Appalachian area, and I love Appalachian folklore. I hope to make it back there one day. When he talks about Delaware, and he says that the land seems lifeless in comparison to Appalachia, I know that feeling all too well. That's how the Florida sand feels when I sink my toes into it. Just not quite as good as that thick Georgia clay that I'm used to. But anyway, I'll stop waxing poetic and go ahead and thank my sponsors. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Xaronan for being our Ghostly Reader contributor, and thanks to Glenn Jenkins for being our Ghostly Writer contributor. Thanks, everybody. We just couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can be part of our Spooky Skeleton Tier Army and have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I do. Spooky Skeleton Tier contributors and up also get their videos a day early. So, have your Wednesday video on Tuesday and your Friday video on Thursday. If you enjoy what we do here, I'm sure you can find some other videos at the end. Why not go ahead and watch one? Maybe think about subscribing, hitting that bell so you don't miss a single video. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening. The house was a small, two-story affair, with white siding on the bottom floor and gray shingles on the top. 3 windows were facing the street, a large picture window, a small, rectangular one above that, and another large window below it. I got out of my car and walked towards the door, knocking twice before it opened. A woman stood there, wearing a blue dress with her hair tied back in a bun. She had bright green eyes that seemed to sparkle when she saw me standing outside her house. "Hello," she said cheerfully. Her voice was soft, but carried well through the night air. "Hi, are you Miss Tanner?" She nodded. "Yes, I am." She smiled again and stepped aside so I could enter the house. It smelled odd inside. Not bad or anything like that, just strange, like old books and dust. "Please come in." I entered her living room. It wasn't much more than a couch and a coffee table, an end table with a lamp on it. That's all I really needed for a place to sleep. The walls were painted yellow, which looked nice against the dark furniture. The carpet was black and covered most of the hardwood floors. There was a small kitchen off to the side of the living room with a sink, a stove, and a fridge. Everything was clean and tidy. "Sorry for the mess," she said, while pointing to some boxes stacked in the corner. "My husband died last year, and I just haven't had the time to get around to moving everything yet." "No problem. I don't mind sleeping in a bit of mess." She chuckled. "Well, if you want to put your things away, feel free. Just make sure not to take too long, since I have to leave in a few hours." "Okay, thank you." "You're welcome. I'll be right back." She disappeared down a hallway. As I looked around the room, I noticed something else odd about the house. The walls weren't straight. They bulged outward here and there like they'd been pushed from the inside out by someone, pushing their way through them. It was subtle enough that it didn't bother me at first, but as I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't just the walls. Every single surface in the entire house had these little imperfections, including the ceiling and the floor. I heard footsteps coming down the hall and turned to see Miss Tanner returning with 2 glasses filled with water. She handed me one and took a seat on the couch across from me. "So, what brings you out this way?" she asked as she sipped her drink. "I'm looking for a friend of mine. He went missing in the area about a month ago." "Oh, that's dreadful. What happened?" "He just vanished." I paused as I thought about how to explain. "He was staying in an abandoned hotel nearby and never came back. We think he might have gotten lost in the woods." She shook her head sadly. "That's awful. Is there any chance he survived? Maybe ran away somewhere?" "I don't know. I hope so." She sighed heavily and leaned back on the couch. "I'm sorry. I wish I could help you find him." We sat quietly for a few moments before she spoke up again. "I don't mean to pry, but are you sure he isn't still alive? Maybe he's hiding somewhere or something." "Well, maybe," I said hesitantly. "Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" "I'm not sure, but I have a hunch." She laughed softly and shook her head. "Well, let me know if you hear anything about him. I'll keep my ears open as well." "Thanks. I better get some sleep now," I said, standing up from the couch. "Of course. I'll show you to your room." I downed the glass of water and placed it on the table. Even that seemed crooked. "Thanks again for letting me stay here." "You're more than welcome. Please feel free to use anything in the kitchen if you need anything." "I will." I followed her down the hallway to a staircase leading to the second floor. At the top of those stairs was another hallway that led to 3 doors, one on each side and one at the end. She pointed to the door on the left. "That one's yours. No one else is staying this weekend, so other doors will be locked." She opened the door to my room and flicked a light switch. There was a dresser opposite the bed with a window above it, and a small bed with a nightstand next to it. The wall behind the bed was covered in posters of famous horror movies, slasher flicks mostly. "This should be all set up for you." She motioned towards the bed. "Make yourself comfortable. My room is on the 3rd floor if you need anything." "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." She walked over to the door at the end of the hall and closed it behind her before disappearing into her own room. I took a look around my room before lying down on the bed. The sheets were clean and smelled nice, but I couldn't tell whether they'd been washed recently or not. As I got under them, I noticed something strange about them. They felt heavy, like they were weighted down on one side. When I tried to lift them up, they wouldn't budge. I rolled over on my back and pulled at them, but still no give. Something was definitely wrong with this place. I lay there staring at the ceiling for a while before drifting off into a deep but restless sleep. I woke up sometime later to a knocking on the other side of my door. I sat up and rubbed my eyes before standing up from the bed. "Who is it?" I called out, walking over to the door. There was no answer. I unlocked the door and cracked it open. It was dark outside, but the moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I stepped out into the hallway and saw nothing except darkness. "Hello?" I called again, but once again there was no response. "Is someone there?" I asked as I turned around slowly. I heard another knock from behind me, and spun around only to catch sight of Miss Tanner standing in the doorway to her room. Her hair had fallen loose from her bun and hung down past her shoulders. She was wearing a white tank top and blue pajama pants with red stripes down them. She looked like she was trying to hide herself by covering her face with her hands, which were pressed against her cheeks. "Miss Tanner?" She didn't say anything, continuing to stare at me with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" I asked as I approached her. She nodded, but kept her head down. What's happened?" I asked as I reached out to touch her shoulder. She flinched away from my hand and backed up until she hit the wall behind her. Then, without saying a word, she ran down the hallway and disappeared into the shadows. I stood there for several seconds, dumbfounded by what had happened. What the hell had I just witnessed? Was it real? Or was it just one of those dreams or hallucinations brought on by stress or exhaustion? I went back inside my room and locked the door behind me. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and checked the time. It was after midnight. I'd been asleep for hours. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the poster of Friday the 13th hanging on the wall above the desk. Why would Miss Tanner act like that? And why would she try to hide from me when I touched her? It made no sense. I sighed heavily and laid back down on the bed. I wanted to go back to sleep, but I knew I couldn't fall asleep now. Not until I figured out what was going on here. Maybe if I waited long enough, she'd come back out and explain herself. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because suddenly I was shaken awake by someone pounding on the door. "Wake up!" I jumped up from the bed and opened the door to find Miss Tanner standing in front of me, with her hands balled into fists at her side. "What's wrong?" "Get dressed. You have to leave right now," she said frantically as she began to pace back and forth. "Why?" "You don't know how dangerous this place is. Get your things and get out, now." "What are you talking about?" She stopped pacing and looked me dead in the eye. "The house is cursed." "What?" "It's haunted. There are spirits in this house." I laughed nervously and shook my head. "There aren't any ghosts here." "Then what do you call that thing you saw earlier tonight?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. Was she talking about herself? "I'm not leaving until I get some answers." "Please, just go. If you stay here much longer, something bad will happen to you, just like your friend." "My friend?" "Just go," she yelled. She started running downstairs. "Wait," I shouted after her, but it was too late. She was already halfway up the steps before she turned around and glared at me. "Tell me what happened." "He died," she said simply. "How?" "They got him." "Who?" "The monsters." I blinked at her and tried to process what she was telling me. Monsters? Yes, the monsters. They came through the walls and they took him away. Are you insane? I screamed at her. There's no such thing as ghosts or monsters. She frowned at me and shook her head. There are more things than just that. Then she pointed to the floor below us. You need to leave right now before they come for you next. I can't leave. My friend might be here somewhere. He could still be alive. She let out a frustrated sigh and walked over to the window. She pushed aside the curtains and looked outside. The moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I followed her gaze out the window and saw nothing except for darkness. She pulled open the window and leaned out into the night air. He's leaving, she called out into the darkness. I heard a low growl coming from what sounded like inside the walls. Miss Tanner slowly backed away from the window. Then, without warning, she fell backwards onto the ground. Her body hit the floor with a sickening crunch and didn't move again. I stood there, staring at Miss Tanner's broken form lying on the floor for several seconds, before turning around and sprinting down the stairs. The whole house began to creak and moan, and it appeared as if the walls were closing in on me. I ran past the kitchen and the living room, both of which appeared to be untouched, and headed towards the front door. The only light came from the moon shining through the windows of the hallway. As I approached the exit, I felt something grab hold of my shoulder and pull me back. I spun around quickly to see a figure standing in the shadows behind me. It was tall and thin, with oily skin and long black hair. Its face was covered by a mask made of human bones. I struggled against its grip, but couldn't break free. The walls looked as if they were melting, and more human bone-masked faces were emerging from all around me, surrounding me on all sides and closing in on me until I couldn't breathe. I reached out to touch one of them, but only grabbed hold of empty air. Then suddenly, I was dragged back through the walls, felt myself descending into that pitch-black abyss beneath me. I woke up gasping for breath and sat right up in bed. My heart was racing and my body was soaked with sweat. There was a loud bang on the door and I jumped out of bed. I unlocked the door and opened it slightly, just enough to see who was knocking. But when I did, I wasn't surprised to see Mrs. Tanner standing there with her hands balled into fists at her side. Get dressed. You have to leave right now.